Step into the captivating and frankly exhausting world of Victorian fashion. This wasn't just about putting on a dress. It was about assembling an entire architectural masterpiece every single day. These outfits weren't clothes in the way we know them. They were layered contraptions, stitched with elegance, yes, but also loaded with steel, whalebone, lace, and an unspoken endurance test. Hidden beneath those graceful layers was a daily reality that most of us today could hardly wrap our heads around. Imagine starting your day by being cinched tightly into a corset, one that didn't just sculpt your waist, but also made breathing a conscious effort. Then came the layers: petticoats, crinolines, bustles, bodices, overskirts, each adding weight, structure, and restriction. Now try navigating the simplest parts of life, sitting, walking, or heaven forbid using the restroom, while essentially wearing a wearable cage that could take up more space than your dining table. It wasn't just fashion. It was commitment, discomfort, and daily performance, all sewn into one. Now imagine this. You're gliding through narrow hallways, but your skirts span nearly 6 feet wide. Every step becomes a delicate negotiation. You can't just turn on a dime. You have to plan it like choreography. And sitting? That's not just sitting. It's a full-blown operation. You angle your body, gather your layers, and somehow lower yourself with dignity, all while society expects you to look poised and graceful, as if none of this is even remotely difficult. But here's the question no one dares ask out loud. How did Victorian women actually go to the bathroom? Seriously. With cages of crinoline, steel hoops, and layers upon layers of fabric, how does one function in daily life, let alone handle nature's most basic call? To answer that, we have to rewind, back to the start of her day. Getting dressed wasn't a casual affair. There was no throw something on and go. It was a ritual. The first layer? A simple, lightweight linen shift, the one garment that actually touched her skin. It served as a barrier, soaking up sweat and protecting the more expensive outerwear. From there, it only got more elaborate. Corset, petticoats, a bustle, underskirts, overskirts, bodices. Each layer had its role in creating the silhouette of the era. But beneath the elegance was a hidden reality. These weren't just clothes, they were commitments. And somehow, women moved through their day, and yes, even used the bathroom, with grace, ingenuity, and a whole lot of patience. Let's start with the first layer, the one no one ever saw, but every woman relied on. A simple linen shift, soft against the skin. It wasn't just modesty, it was strategy. This underlayer acted like a protective shield, soaking up sweat and oil to keep the outer garments, often expensive and hard to clean, in pristine condition. Because in Victorian times, laundry wasn't a toss in the machine kind of deal. Washing fine fabrics was a chore saved for rare occasions, not daily routines. Then came the corset, the crown jewel and curse of Victorian fashion. Made with rigid boning and tightly laced, it was more than a shaping tool. It was a statement. The ideal Victorian silhouette was one of control, discipline, and tiny waists. For many women, the corset wasn't optional. It was worn daily, often from girlhood. Over time, some bodies literally changed shape to accommodate the pressure. Breathing freely? That was a luxury most corseted women simply didn't have. And just when you think the dressing is done, it's only getting started. Petticoat after petticoat followed. These weren't just for volume. They added structure, warmth, and weight. Think of them like scaffolding beneath a gown. each layer building on the last, each with its own function. Depending on the era and occasion, a woman might wear 5 to 7 layers before even stepping into her outer dress. Let's talk about the unsung heroes of Victorian layering, the coats and outer layers. These weren't simply worn for warmth or modesty. They were tools of transformation. Each added layer didn't just conceal, it contributed to the grand silhouette. Like petals on a flower, they built up the volume, turning an ordinary dress into a dramatic, bell-shaped spectacle. Some women wore 5, 6, even 7 layers in total. With every added piece came more weight, more restriction, and a growing challenge: movement. Walking became a mindful act. Sitting, an ordeal. And going through a doorway, you'd better hope it was wide enough. But the centerpiece, the structural marvel, was the crinoline. This wasn't fabric, it was architecture. A skeletal framework made of steel hoops, held together by fabric tapes and worn beneath the dress. The crinoline created that signature round silhouette we associate with the era. It literally held the skirts away from the body, forming a floating dome of fashion. At its most extreme, a crinoline could stretch up to 6 feet in diameter. 6 feet. That's wider than most sofas, and nearly impossible to maneuver through narrow halls or doorways without turning sideways, lifting your skirts, or hoping the furniture was willing to cooperate. It was elegance with a side of inconvenience. Now picture this. You're standing in front of a doorway and you can't fit through. Not because of anything you did, but because your dress, supported by an enormous steel crinoline, is nearly 6 feet wide. Turning sideways becomes a strategy. Sitting down? That's a mission in itself. Victorian fashion wasn't just dramatic. It demanded the world adapt to it. Furniture had to be reimagined. Chairs were designed without arms so women could slide in without crushing their skirts. Benches were widened. Dining tables were spaced farther apart. Even social settings adjusted their layouts, just to let women sit without collapsing the very structure of their elegance. And while it may seem glamorous in portraits, now imagine wearing all of that. Layers of linen, petticoats, corsets, steel hoops every single day. Now add this question. How do you use the bathroom? What was a 2-minute routine for others became a full production for a Victorian woman. The weight, the width, the delicacy, even the most basic tasks required planning, assistance, and patience. These garments weren't just fashion. They were lifestyle, demanding grace, endurance, and a level of daily effort that most of us today could barely imagine. It wasn't just fashion, it was choreography. Every move required strategy. Every step demanded balance. Victorian women weren't merely dressed to impress. They were navigating a daily obstacle course built from fabric, steel, and social expectations. What we consider simple, like sitting or using the restroom, became a series of well-rehearsed maneuvers, requiring patience, creativity, and no small amount of physical coordination. These women weren't just wearing clothing, they were living inside it. Their outfits were so complex and layered that they reshaped how they moved, sat, stood, and even thought about their bodies. Fashion didn't just express who they were, it dictated how they lived. And when it came to personal care, that's where things got even trickier. Using the bathroom, for example, wasn't just a private moment. It was a process, a tactical operation really. With hoop skirts that extended wider than door frames, corsets that compressed the rib cage, and multiple layers of fabric to manage, even the most basic human needs had to be approached with ingenuity. This wasn't just a matter of modesty or tradition. It was daily survival wrapped in ribbons and steel. What should have been a simple task became a finely choreographed routine. In the Victorian world, even the most basic human need, relieving oneself, was anything but simple. Wrapped in layers of lace, steel hoops, corsets, and petticoats, women had to navigate not only the weight of their clothing, but also the weight of social decorum. Every movement was performed within a strict framework, not just of fabric, but of expectation. And in the midst of this complicated dance, there was one quiet, practical object that played a starring role in daily life, yet rarely got any credit: the chamber pot. But forget the crude image you may have in your head. These weren't haphazard containers shoved under beds. For Victorian women, they were purposefully crafted tools of necessity. The most common design? Oval-shaped, with a wide, gently sloped interior, intentionally shaped to slide beneath layers of crinoline, petticoats, and undergarments. It was discreet, it was functional, and most importantly, it gave women a way to manage their bodily needs without undressing, something that, as we've seen, could take an entire team and half a morning. The chamber pot was a quiet act of design brilliance, tailored to fit seamlessly into a world where clothing was both a symbol of status and a logistical puzzle. Even the chamber pot had its own language, spoken not with words, but with design. In the refined world of Victorian households, it wasn't just about function. It was about subtlety, elegance, and unspoken systems. Some of the more high-end chamber pots came with tight-fitting lids, not only to contain odors, but to serve as discreet signals. A closed lid meant it's time to be emptied. No awkward conversations, no breaking the gentle rhythm of civility. In wealthier homes, the chamber pot disappeared completely, at least to the untrained eye. It was artfully hidden in plain sight. Elegant furniture became dual-purpose: chairs with hidden compartments, cabinets that concealed containers, handcrafted wooden commodes, so beautifully designed they could easily be mistaken for high-end decor. These pieces weren't just practical, they were masterpieces of design and discretion, blending necessity with artistry. Behind the polished wood and floral upholstery lived a quiet truth. Even the most intimate, messy parts of life had to be handled with grace, privacy, and dignity. Because in Victorian society, maintaining appearances wasn't just about looking beautiful. It was about making the uncomfortable invisible. Behind every elegant woman in a Victorian home was a team working in quiet harmony, the invisible hands that made the impossible look effortless. The household staff didn't just clean. They moved with near-silent precision, like the backstage crew of a grand performance. Their work demanded more than efficiency. It required timing, coordination, intuition, and most importantly, unwavering discretion. They were masters of subtlety, ensuring that even the most personal and awkward tasks remained behind the curtain of decorum. But now, let's talk about the logistics. A Victorian woman couldn't simply lift her skirts and take care of business. No, she was wrapped in up to 20 pounds of fabric, petticoats, bustles, corsets, and a steel frame crinoline that acted more like a wearable birdcage than a garment. So how did she manage it? She learned a technique, part instinct, part choreography, for maneuvering around her fashion prison. It involved lifting just the right layers, in just the right order, using hands, arms, and sometimes even specially designed tools. She had to gather the fabric strategically, balance her weight, and angle herself over a chamber pot or commode, all while maintaining grace and composure. It was a skill, refined, practiced, and passed down, much like everything else in Victorian womanhood, never discussed out loud, but absolutely essential to surviving the day. It was part choreography, part mechanical mastery, and entirely reliant on body awareness. Managing bodily needs while encased in steel, fabric, and social expectations wasn't about undressing, it was about positioning. The chamber pot was discreetly placed, and through subtle shifts in posture, a practiced gathering of skirts, and precise adjustments in stance, a Victorian woman could relieve herself without removing a single layer. No buttons, no zippers, no unclasping. Just careful control of movement and an extraordinary sense of balance. And in public or formal settings, the system became even more refined. Large estates, ballrooms, and grand venues often featured retiring rooms, elegant, private spaces where women could step away from the crowd to regroup, refresh, and discreetly manage their needs. These weren't basic washrooms. They were soft-lit sanctuaries, furnished with chairs, mirrors, and sometimes even attendants. It was a world where the natural functions of the body met the elaborate performance of social grace. And everything, from the curve of a chair to the angle of a hatpin, was designed to preserve dignity. Forget the idea of a modern powder room. Victorian retiring rooms were far more than just quiet corners. These were fully staffed sanctuaries, elegantly furnished and discreetly managed. Inside, maids didn't just tidy up, they operated like a silent support crew, ready to assist their ladies with everything from lifting layers of fabric to timing their movements to ensuring not a single ribbon was out of place. They managed the invisible choreography of womanhood with grace, precision, and deep understanding. This wasn't simply about functionality. It was a form of art. The true skill wasn't just in using the facilities. It was in doing so without breaking the illusion. A woman could navigate a deeply private need in a crowded social setting, then return to the ballroom without a hair out of place or a hint of disturbance in her poise. This delicate balancing act was taught, practiced, and passed down through generations, a hidden curriculum of elegance. Women of the era became quiet masters of movement, posture, and self-presentation. They didn't just wear fashion, they performed it. Every moment in public was a stage, and even in the most personal situations, the show never stopped. What looked like effortless grace was, in truth, a quiet miracle of coordination. But here's the part that might truly surprise you. For a large portion of the Victorian era, many women didn't wear what we would consider underwear, at least not in the way we know it today. That's right, no briefs, no panties, no modern undergarments. Why? Because the sheer volume, weight, and structure of their skirts were believed to provide enough coverage. The idea of wearing yet another layer beneath all that fabric. In the early days, it was considered unnecessary, even imprac. It may sound like the setup to a farce, but for Victorian women, it posed a very real, very daily challenge. Imagine strolling through a public park in a gown 6 feet wide, corseted and crinolined, yet knowing that beneath all that grandeur, there's open air. The vulnerability, the exposure, the risk, especially in a time when modesty and reputation were everything. Of course, as time went on, the fashion world adapted. Garments like split drawers, essentially open-crotch trousers, began to emerge. These allowed women to manage bathroom needs more easily without fully undressing, while still adhering to society's standards of decency. But until then, it was a dance between elegance and exposure, another hidden layer of the performance women carried every day. Solution: a small but revolutionary invention, split drawers. Unlike the underwear we know today, these weren't sewn shut at the crotch. Instead, they were open, designed for functionality over coverage, allowing women to relieve themselves without removing their elaborate gowns, but also offering just enough modesty to save them from a public scandal when the wind came calling. It may sound like a quirky detail, but this quiet innovation changed everything. Split drawers became a symbol of practicality in a world ruled by decorum, a reminder that even in the most restrictive fashion, women were constantly finding ways to adapt, survive, and reclaim a little more control. At first glance, they looked simple, just two pant legs loosely connected at the waist. But split drawers were more than just fabric. They were a clever, quiet revolution. These garments solved a very real, very private dilemma. With all the weight and structure of Victorian fashion, crinolines, corsets, layers upon layers, undressing to use the bathroom simply wasn't realistic. So how did women manage? Enter split drawers, designed with an open seam down the middle. Hidden beneath all the layers, they provided modesty while walking, sitting, or even dancing. But when nature called, they allowed women to discreetly handle their personal needs without removing a single layer of clothing. It was the perfect blend of modesty and practicality, a design born out of necessity but delivered with grace. For Victorian women, split drawers weren't just undergarments. They were quiet enablers of dignity, autonomy, and daily survival in a world where fashion often worked against function. Thanks to this ingenious innovation, women could maintain their iconic, layered elegance while navigating the intricate ritual of chamber pot visits, all with subtlety, balance, and an unwavering sense of decorum. With split drawers, using the chamber pot became less of a production and more of a private, manageable task. There was less effort, more confidence, and importantly, more dignity. The design spread quickly, especially among upper-class women and those navigating high society events, where every move was under quiet observation and bathroom logistics were even more precarious. In ballrooms, theaters, and dinner parties, where appearances had to be flawless, this small adaptation made a world of difference. But split drawers were just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Victorian women had to master a complex daily system, a blend of elegance, restraint, and sheer practicality, just to exist comfortably in their clothing. Managing life in full Victorian dress took far more than grace. It required strategy, unspoken coordination with maids or attendants, and an intimate understanding of one's wardrobe that bordered on architectural knowledge. Each layer had a purpose. Each movement was calculated. And beneath it all was the quiet labor of making the impossible look effortless. Because in that world, composure wasn't just a virtue, it was a performance. And every woman was both the lead actress and the stage manager behind the scenes. Much of it happened quietly, behind closed doors and beneath layers of fabric, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. But staying clean, fresh, and composed wasn't just about comfort for Victorian women. It was about dignity. In a time when appearances shaped social value, hygiene became a hidden pillar of respectability, even though the tools for it were far from modern. There was no running water in every home, no disposable hygiene products, and certainly no bathroom privacy like we know today. Yet women found ways, discreet, resourceful, and sometimes downright ingenious to care for themselves with grace. Let's start with something we take for granted: toilet paper. For most of the Victorian era, the soft, perforated rolls we know today simply didn't exist or weren't widely available. So what did people use? In less affluent homes, it could be newspaper, catalog pages, or even leaves. In wealthier households, soft rags were more common, washed and reused, stored discreetly in retiring rooms. Some even used wool or lace-like cloths, kept for that very purpose. It sounds surprising now, but back then, it was just life. A quiet, invisible ritual carried out with care, because even in a world draped in corsets and silk, hygiene was deeply personal and deeply human. When it came to personal hygiene, people simply used what was practical, whatever their environment, status, or resources allowed. There were no package rolls waiting in a drawer, no soft tissue with delicate embossing, just necessity and creativity. For working-class families, practicality ruled. Pages torn from old newspapers, catalogs, or scraps of recycled paper often stood in as substitutes. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. And in rural areas, nature stepped in. Soft leaves, smooth moss, or reusable rags were common stand-ins, passed down as everyday knowledge. But in wealthier households, the approach took on a quieter elegance: soft linen cloths, carefully cut into small, neat squares, became the preferred choice. They weren't just functional, they were thoughtful, gentle against the skin, washable and reusable. These cloths offered a more comfortable and refined experience. Washing them became part of the household's rhythm, handled discreetly alongside the laundry by trusted staff. And while simple in design, these cloths quietly signaled something deeper: status, care, and an unspoken code of gentility, where even the most private routines reflected grace. Because in Victorian life, even the unseen was held to a certain standard, not out of vanity, but out of respect for one's place in the world. Even in the most private corners of daily life, class shaped everything. From how women cleaned themselves to how they cleaned their clothes, the divide between working-class reality and upper-class ritual was constant and often invisible to outsiders. And speaking of laundry, it wasn't as simple as tossing clothes into a machine. Victorian laundry was labor-intensive, strategic, and selective. Dresses were grand, layered masterpieces, often crafted from silks, velvets, and other delicate materials that couldn't survive frequent washing. Instead of cleaning them outright, women, or their maids, relied on gentle maintenance, brushing off dust, airing out garments, and using finely milled powders to absorb oils and reduce odor. But the real workhorses of hygiene, the inner layers: linen shifts, chemises, often called chemise, petticoats, and those cleverly designed split drawers took the brunt of daily life. These garments were worn directly against the skin and were made from washable fabrics like cotton or linen. They acted as a protective barrier, catching sweat, body oils, and dirt, so the expensive outer garments didn't have to. These were washed regularly, scrubbed, boiled, wrung out by hand, often by laundresses who worked tirelessly behind the scenes. It was a quiet system of sacrifice and protection. The inner layers bore the wear and grime, so the outer layers could remain pristine, elegant, and unspoiled. A metaphor, perhaps, for the way Victorian society itself was built. Carefully curated on the surface, supported by tireless effort underneath. Beneath the intricate, costly dresses and towering silhouettes was a quiet challenge Victorian women faced every single month. one that had nothing to do with fashion and everything to do with endurance. Menstruation in the Victorian era came without modern conveniences. No disposable pads, no tampons, no period underwear. Instead, women had to manage their cycles within the constraints of corsets, steel frames, layers of skirts, and silence. So how did they do it? With resourcefulness and resilience. The most common solution was a homemade system known as the belt and pad arrangement. A soft cloth belt was worn around the waist, designed to hold absorbent material, usually pieces of flannel, folded cotton, or any soft fabric that was readily available at home. These pads were reusable and had to be washed by hand after each use. In some households, especially where money was tight or resources were scarce, women even used natural fillers like dried moss or wool, chosen for their absorbency and softness. There was no luxury in this routine, only quiet necessity. Pads had to be changed carefully, discreetly, and often with the help of a maid or midwife, especially during heavy days when garments were complex and restrictive. It required foresight, planning, and a practiced hand, all while maintaining the appearance of composure in a world where menstruation was rarely spoken of aloud. It was yet another layer of invisible labor, carried silently by women, a monthly reminder of their strength, adaptability, and the unspoken grace they upheld in a society that demanded perfection at every turn. It required more than just materials. It demanded privacy, timing, and a quiet kind of expertise. Victorian women navigated menstruation with remarkable grace, all while juggling corsets, social appearances, and the countless expectations placed upon them. And yet, this part of womanhood was rarely written about, even more rarely spoken of, and almost always kept behind the veil of discretion. But make no mistake, it was a routine. Pads needed to be changed multiple times a day, often in silence, often without slowing down. Whether attending to children, entertaining guests, or managing household tasks, women learned to move through it all with calm efficiency. There were no sick days or excuses, only quiet resilience. And the system that made it all possible, one built on silent cooperation and generational wisdom. Mothers passed down the knowledge to daughters, not in public conversations, but in hushed, private moments. Ladies' maids offered skilled assistance when needed, knowing how to help without a single word exchanged. Even the architecture of homes reflected this rhythm, with retiring rooms, private wash areas, and hidden laundry systems, all designed to support women's needs, while keeping the illusion of effortlessness intact. It was a dance between invisibility and necessity, a testament to how women have always found ways to care for themselves, even in eras that refuse to acknowledge the reality of their bodies. Beneath the calm surface of polite society, a different kind of strength was at work. While the world expected refinement, composure, and grace, Victorian women were managing a hidden world of physical constraints, unspoken routines, and constant adaptation, all without missing a beat. And yet, they carried themselves with stunning elegance. They moved through layered garments, silent challenges, and societal pressure with a quiet resilience that rarely received recognition. It wasn't just about being well-dressed or well-mannered. It was about mastering complexity behind the scenes. Their strength wasn't loud. It was lived, woven into every gesture, stitched into every hemline, and passed from one generation to the next. A legacy of grace under pressure and dignity in the unseen.